Welcome to The Explainer. In the world of faith, it often feels like you have to pick a team, right? Are you a conservative or a progressive? Are you focused on theology or are you an activist? But what if the most powerful path is to be both?
Yeah, think about it. In American Christianity, those two labels can seem like they're from different planets. You're either all about doctrine and personal salvation, or you're out on the front lines fighting for social justice. But there's this incredible historical figure who just blows that whole idea up and forces us to ask, is that even a real choice?
I want you to meet Francis Grimke. This man was a pastor who preached historic orthodox theology, and he was one of the founders of the NAACP. I mean, come on. He just refused to be put in a box, and his life is a powerful challenge to how we think about faith and action today.
So, to really get Grimke and his fierce convictions, you have to understand where he came from. His theology wasn't some academic exercise. It was forged in the fire of unbelievable hardship. His life story is just staggering. He was born into the brutality of slavery, literally treated as property by his own family. But then, after emancipation, he grabbed hold of education and didn't let go. He ends up graduating from one of the most prestigious seminaries in the country and leading this incredibly influential church right in the nation's capital. And get this, he wasn't just a survivor. The man was an intellectual giant. Charles Hodge, who was arguably one of the most important theologians of the entire 19th century, considered Grimke his peer, as brilliant as any student he'd ever had. This wasn't just a pastor, this was a theological heavyweight.
So Grimke's ministry, it was anything but peaceful. He really saw himself as fighting a war on two fronts against two very different and very flawed versions of Christianity that he saw taking over America. You can see his two-front war laid out right here. On one side, he relentlessly attacked what he called color phobia, a faith that could talk the Christian talk but was rotten with racism. But at the exact same time, he was pushing back against a creedless faith, one that was all about social action, but was, in his view, theologically hollow and ultimately useless.
Let's talk about that first front, his fight against racism in the church. He was absolutely outraged by famous evangelists like Dwight L. Moody, who held segregated revival meetings. Think about that. They were basically blessing the sin of racism right from the pulpit.
And Grimke's response was just so sharp, so biting. He said that if John the Baptist had been as discreet as Mr. Moody, trying not to offend the powerful people, he probably would have kept his head. It's a brutal takedown, but his point is clear. A prophet who compromises on justice isn't a prophet at all.
But see, that's what makes him so fascinating. He wasn't just a social critic. On that other front, he was deeply worried about a more liberal faith that was tossing out core Christian beliefs, like the divinity of Christ or the authority of Scripture. For him, this was a totally different but just as fatal compromise.
And he really didn't pull any punches. Grimke was completely convinced that trying to do social justice without deep theological conviction was like a ship without a rudder. It might look busy, but it was powerless and drifting. He believed true, lasting action had to be fueled by deep belief.
So the big question is, how did he hold these two things together? Fighting racism over here, fighting for doctrine over there. Well, for Grimke, it wasn't a tension. It wasn't a balancing act. It was one single unified mission. And here it is, from the man himself. This was his mission statement for 40 years. And just listen to that language, with all my might. He poured the same passion, the same fire, into preaching the gospel and fighting racial prejudice. It was never an either-or proposition. It was always both and. So you see these two steps. They weren't two different jobs. They were two parts of the same job. But what was the glue? What was the one single belief that fused them together so tightly? The whole structure of his life, his entire ministry, rested on one huge theological idea. It wasn't that his social action was alongside his faith. It was that his social action grew directly out of his faith. And this was it, the image of God. Grimke believed with every ounce of his being that every single person is created in God's image. So to diminish someone, to segregate them, to brutalize them because of their race wasn't just a social problem. It was a theological crime. It was like spitting in the face of God himself. So why are we talking about a pastor who lived over a century ago?
Well, because his life and his ideas speak so powerfully right into this divided world we're living in today. His legacy just completely breaks the easy categories we try to force everyone into. He proves that it is absolutely possible to be deeply committed to theological orthodoxy and radically committed to social justice. He's living proof that they're not opposing forces.
And this wasn't just a phase for him. We're talking about 50 years. For nearly half a century, from one of the most important pulpits in Washington, D.C., he lived out a Christianity that was tough-minded in its doctrine and tender-hearted in its demand for justice.
At his ultimate vision, the thing he was really fighting for wasn't for one group to win out over another. He was fighting for a totally different kind of kingdom, where our ultimate allegiance isn't to a group, but to a higher principle of love and justice for all.
Look, Grimke's life was not easy. He took criticism from all sides, and his legacy leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? In a world that is constantly screaming for us to pick a camp, what does it really take to hold on to a deeper truth and to fight on two fronts for both faith and justice?